There are no better words in sports than Game 7.
Who would have thought that a week ago that the Florida Panthers would be on the verge of being on the wrong end of history?
Mets star closer Edwin Diaz is heading towards a 10-game suspension. Was it fair, and what did the Mets do?
It is the week of the NBA draft. Only a few days remain before the big day arrives. We'll get into the latest intel, the rumors, where things all stand, and more.
Tennessee is playing for the national championship.
The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
I'm Peter Bukowski. The Big 6 in 60 is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Last-minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed. Today, we get the local insight from the top stories in sports, including the start of the NBA draft week and big players set to miss time on the diamond in New York. But we start with the biggest story of the day, Game 7 for the Stanley Cup. The Florida Panthers will try to avoid disaster tonight. Florida started the Stanley Cup final with 3 straight wins over the Edmonton Oilers, but then did what only 2 other teams have ever done in the final. They dropped 3 in a row to give us a Game 7. Locked On Panthers host Armando Velez previewed the winner-take-all matchup with fellow Miami host Alex Dono of Locked On Canes.
The Florida Panthers going into this, and I did not say what my panic meter would have been going into Game 6. I did that prior to Game 5 of what it would be, obviously, because I never thought we would make it.
Right.
We would make it to a Game 7 after. I mean, a lot of people did. Even neutral fans didn't think so. But I would say that my panic meter is right now at an 8. But at the same time, for the Panthers, there's no other lineup changes that you can make for the Panthers to just get over the top too. When it comes down to ultimately the superstars, you can try to put a Nokopoza back in, you can try to put a Lawrence back in too, but it's really about just when it comes to structure and the speed of trying to manage it. That's really what it comes down to, and for me, it's really about coaching at this point for the Panthers. Well, not necessarily, but having it in that meeting, but also implementing that on the ice of still staying tight in the neutral zone, putting multiple bodies whenever they're on an entry too, so that Bob can relax in his crease.
Yeah. I think to me, really for these next couple of days, it's almost entirely about psychology. I thought, you're right to say that, at this point, it's been a very long playoff run, and Paul Maurice has done just about every possible line combination and every tweak to the power play you could possibly do. So all of that tinkering, you pretty much know what you have with every combination at this point. I think to me, it's about the attitude. And I'm going to say this, and I mean this with 1,000% of my soul. It's not only about the psychology of the Panthers players. I'll get to that in a second, but I think the fan base can play a role in this as well, Armando, because as they, Amerant Bank Arena, it's obviously going to be full on Monday night. The tickets are going to be very expensive, of course, but Panther fans, they've stuck through to this point. This is a Game 7. People say Game 7 is the 2 most exciting words in sports, so you get one of those. But I want to see what sort of energy comes from that crowd, because I'm expecting a very nervous energy from the fans. And I don't think that's really a good thing, right? Where, the first couple of games of the series, you're on your feet, you're yelling and screaming the entire game. You're excited. The team is winning. Now, as we've talked about, you've seen a 3-0 lead turn into a 3-3 and an opportunity at one of the bigger choke jobs in professional sports history. How much of that nervous energy is going to transfer over to the fan base? Because I do think that can affect the state of play out there. But of course, I'm not saying fan base psychology is more important than player psychology. And this is something, again, I was watching Paul Maurice post game after the Game 6 loss, and he said, if you were obviously to go into our dressing room right now, you would have, a lot of anger and a lot of upset people. That's okay right now. Get it out of your system, and then, starting today, Saturday, needs to be focused, and you need to have that sort of professionalism. And I expect that, and Captain Sasha Barkov also talked about it after the game, the opportunity. It doesn't seem like he's dwelling on, what's led to this game 7, and everyone needs to have that focus, one game at a time. The only thing that matters is the game in front of you. And something that I would certainly hope to see, Armando, is a lot of times I like to say this, in the playoffs, whether you're talking Stanley Cup playoffs, NBA playoffs, whatever, that you don't always see momentum carry over from one game to another, but we've definitely seen that over these past couple games where Edmonton has been able to carry their momentum over. Hopefully the Florida Panthers can fit that narrative. And I also wonder, how much physical exhaustion is there going to be on the Edmonton side at this point? Maybe they're still just redlining on adrenaline, right? But, to dig yourself out of a 3-0 hole, that is a physically and mentally exhausting thing. And now you're back in Florida for the decisive game. So I'm hoping to see some kind of an adrenaline dump when it comes to what Edmonton's done to reach this point. And hopefully the Florida Panthers can handle their business. But bottom line is, every player in that dressing room, you need to completely forget what's happened over these past 3 games. You've got it's a 1-game series now. 1 game, winner take all. This is all you need to focus on. Games 4, 5, and 6 do not matter. This is a 1-game Stanley Cup Finals series. You have to focus on that, and you have to play at your best and cut down on the stupid mistakes, please.
Yeah, and for me, the last 30 minutes of Game 5, if you look anything like that from start to finish, you're giving yourself a good chance to win for the Panthers there, even though they were behind there at the time. But you saw a little bit of that and how they fed off the crowd, especially when there were 16 minutes to go in Game 5, and seeing how close the Panthers were and the push that they created. Although things for the Edmonton Oilers were still very tight. And
also, let me add one thing as well. Please score the first goal. Right.
Yes.
Because, and I know the Panthers, regular season and at points in the playoffs, they've been the comeback cats. It doesn't matter. They're down 2-0. They're down 3-1. Doesn't matter. But in this series, it has mattered. The team that scores the opening goal is 5-1 so far in this series. I believe you have to set the tone early. And that ties into the nervous energy. This crowd at Amaranth Bank Arena, if Edmonton scores the first goal, it's going to get very quiet and very nervous. The Panthers need to start the party.
Yeah, Panthers 2 out of those 6 games where they were first on the score sheet for them at this point. And it's crazy. Also, you mentioned momentum, and part of me doesn't want to believe that it could go from game to game, but I can't lie. I can't lie when I'm seeing what has been in front of us too, with the eye test of these last 3 games for the Oilers. I mentioned earlier the block shot differential in these 2, the chances off the rush. I mean, got to force them into a cycle somehow for them. I mean, the Tkachuk line didn't even get a shot attempt after the first period too, so that's another thing for them. So that's really how much the Oilers have really neutralized the stars of the Panthers too. So that's it's gonna be very tense. It's gonna be it's like you said, nervous energy for the Panthers going into Game 7. And listen, if we saw Bill Zito throw 1 water bottle after Game 5, but if he threw 4 of them behind the scenes after, he did all the work. He did all the work. He put the Panthers in this position. Now it's up to the players.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And like you said, and I thought you said it best there, there's only so much more that Paul Maurice, obviously he can maybe play a role in that psychology and kind of setting the example for the attitude. But I think Barkov is probably even more important in setting that example. But yeah, Bill Zito and Paul Maurice, their job to this point is pretty much done. It's up to those players to do it.
No doubt. And with Game 7 being Monday night, fun fact, I heard about this this morning. This is the first post-COVID Game 7. So it's been a while since we've had a winner take all for all the marbles in the final round to determine a champion. We didn't think it would get to this point, but the Panthers, one more fight. That's all you need. Just one more fight.
Stay up to date on all things Panthers by subscribing to Locked On Panthers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Up next, while the Panthers have everything to lose, the Oilers have a chance to make history in more than one way with a win tonight. We'll get you the Edmonton side of Game 7 on the Big 6 in 60. I love sports. I think, that's obvious, right? I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports just aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And believe me, I'm usually in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. There is no bigger home underdog on the diamond tonight than the Detroit Tigers. They have to face Aaron Nola and the Philadelphia Phillies. Pretty tall order. FanDuel has the Tigers money line plus 140. Detroit isn't much good at home. So I don't know. It's the Phillies. Take the Phillies. Something to pay attention to. Total runs. FanDuel has the over-under at 8. The Tigers have sneaky good pitching, so this could be a very low-scoring game. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Big 6 in 60, where our local experts take a deeper dive into the day's biggest sports stories. I'm Peter Bukowski. Only 2 teams have ever come back from down 3-0 in the Stanley Cup final to force a Game 7. The 1942 Maple Leafs completed the comeback with a Game 7 win, while the 1945 Red Wings made that big run just to end up coming up short in their Game 7. The Edmonton Oilers hope to join the Maple Leaf side of history and bring Canada its first cup in 31 years. Locked On Oilers host Nick Zararis took a deep dive on everything you need to know about Edmonton going into Game 7.
The thing that's great about sports, and I'm going to echo the sentiments of Spike Lee that I quoted earlier, no one knows. They have to go out there and do it. It's why we play the games. Don't get me wrong. I love data analysis. I do plenty of data analysis trying to get a deeper understanding of players, teams, of series, of games. We have to play games. One game, the best trophy in all of sports, the best player in the world, and like the 4th or 3rd, depending how you feel about Leon Draisaitl in relation to, say, Austin Matthews or Nathan McKinnon. This is what it is all about as a fan. You have spent the last 9 months on this team believing. You might have waned at times when they fired Jay Woodcroft and brought in somebody in Chris Knobloch with no NHL experience. You might have wavered when Cal Pickard got in there. You might have wavered at 3-0 down. And I was ready to call them dead. I said the only way this was going to turn around was if something special happened. And the Oilers are on the doorstep of being one of the most famous teams ever. And let me clarify that. When we talk about the annals of sports history, when we're going through the pantheon of great teams, the story that goes along with it is what matters. We talk about the 96 Bulls winning 72 games in the regular season, the 73-9 Golden State team with the team the year before Durant got there. We talk about the 2004 Red Sox breaking the curse. We talk about the 2016 Cubs breaking the curse, the Showtime Lakers, the Berg Parish Celtics. We talk about the Gretzky Messier Oilers. We talk about the Messier Rangers. We talk about the Crosby Malkin Letang Penguins. Not only are those great players on great teams, we talk about the stories of putting those teams together. You look through recent NHL history and some of the names we're talking about here. I know not everybody likes Jack Eichel. I know not everybody likes Alex Pietrangelo. Those guys are on the cup forever. We go down the list. We go to Colorado, McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog. Gabe Landeskog probably gave up his professional hockey career. I know he is attempting to mount a comeback, but that's how much it means. I think about Chara, Game 7, 2019 with the fishbowl, playing with a broken jaw with his mouth wired shut. I think about a lot of these stories a lot of the time. And I've said this a lot in the last 3 days. I've said this a lot this entire playoff. I've said this since the Dallas series that teams don't get this far that often. You have to appreciate it. You have to savor it. We talked about how it's been 10 months, physical testing before preseason, middle of September, like the 10th, the 11th is when testing starts. And then you get 2 weeks of preseason. This journey started 10 months ago. It is July next week. You have put those 10 months in addition to your entire life to this point to get here. One hockey game. I'm going to click over to my notes here, so excuse me for the delay in this stream of thought, but I want to get the number right. The Edmonton Oilers have won 64 games, including playoffs and regular season this year. Their wins against Dallas, Vancouver, and LA, the series against Florida, and then the 49 regular season wins they've had. It's all led to this. And this is what makes sports great. We are all going to sit around our TVs at 8 o'clock. The puck's going to get dropped about 8:15 because of American TV. I'm sorry. I apologize in advance. They are going to play Game 7 with the cup in the building, with the possibility of finishing a lot of sentences. Who's the only team in the modern era to come back from 3-0 down and win the Stanley Cup Finals? The Edmonton Oilers. Who did the Oilers beat the first time Connor McDavid went to the Florida Panthers? They are one win away from answering a lot of questions. And I started this season, funny enough, I did the hit on the NHL, the Locked On NHL previews. I did the one for the Oilers, and I said the key to the Oilers season would be finding one more secondary scorer to complement their elite players. I mentioned Dylan Holloway as the guy to keep an eye on because he was young. He had some high-level trait. He had some high-quality traits that would lead you to believe he was capable of statistical production at the NHL level. And he's had some moments in this playoffs. Pretty much everybody on this Oilers team has had a moment in these playoffs. And that's one of the keys to stringing together this type of magic. It can't just be McDavid and Draisaitl. Tonight, maybe you can get away with just those two being special. But an entire regular season, 3 playoff series, and 6 games of a cup final, you're going to need a little something from everyone. It's not just the stars. It is everyone. We talk about this series through 6 games. It has been a case of Edmonton stars playing great. Edmonton's depth rising to the occasion. You look at getting goals from Henrique and Fogle and Nuge. Yes, I'm throwing Nuge in the depth column. I'm sorry. You throw in goals from Matias Janmark. You throw in goals from Bush. It takes everyone. I am going to spend my entire Monday thinking about this game. I am going to lament a missed opportunity if it does not happen. That will be a very upsetting episode of Locked On Oilers at about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, and I'm not looking forward to that. So I'm going to say it very straightforward and plain old English. I think the Oilers are going to win this game. Every fiber of your being should tell you the Oilers can win this game. I'm not ready to say the Oilers should win this game because they have to go out and play the games. To quote, as our friend Spike Lee says, that's what makes sports great. You can't make it up. And this is real. It's going to happen in real time. And we're going to watch a lot of questions about a lot of players, a lot of decision makers, and the league at large be answered. And no matter what, this has been an incredible ride. And this is why you love sports. It's for opportunities like this to really put together something special.
Stay up to date on all things Oilers by subscribing to Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. It's NBA draft week, and starting Wednesday, the best young players from around the world will learn where they'll start their NBA careers. The Atlanta Hawks hold the number 1 pick in this year's draft, but what Atlanta will do with that pick remains a mystery since this class has no Victor Wembanyama or Zion Williamson to make things easy. So who do the Hawks go with at number 1? Locked On host Brad Rowland gives his thoughts.
In the last few days, I guess pretty much most of this stuff is going to be revolving around the number 1 overall pick in the draft for obvious reasons. the aforementioned Sam Vecini wrote on Thursday that, quote, league sources continue to get the impression that Atlanta is open for offers for the right deal, end quote, to move down in the draft. But with that said, Jake Fisher of Yahoo, who's been on this podcast many times before, Jake's a friend of mine, wrote on Friday that the Hawks will list the number 1 overall, but they are also willing to hold firm and have not finalized who they're going to pick at this juncture. A little bit different there. Also, Jake reiterated on a podcast appearance with Nate Duncan of Dunked On that in the reporting basically points to the Hawks sticking number 1 overall as the most likely outcome. I will always say this. I'll probably say it again later this week if nothing happens. Always the most likely outcome is a team sticking at the spot they are currently at, especially at number 1. There are very few historic examples of number 1 pick trades. Now, this year is definitely very different. The value of the pick is lower this year because of the class and all that stuff, but usually teams tend to stay there, and that is probably still the most likely outcome for the Hawks. With that said, the other big thing is that Jake wrote is that at this point, this is a quote from Jake, most team personnel picking in the slots behind Atlanta believe the Hawks will ultimately choose between Zachary Risacher and Donovan Clingan, end quote. So one thing to note always here, and keep in mind, is the wording, which is about teams and other teams, not the Hawks, personnel elsewhere, believing something. That is not direct intel from the Hawks. I'm not picking on Jake. He's doing his job reporting this, but there's a difference between direct intel from Atlanta and rival executives or other teams, etc. Keep that in mind. But the more high-profile thing there, of course, is that it notably omits Alex Sarr. And something I was told from 2 different people independently in the last week, even before Jake wrote this, is that they will be fairly surprised if the pick is Alex Sarr at number 1 overall. No one has said that it definitely won't be Alex Sarr. Keep that in mind. Surprise and definite, not the same thing. But there is some real, I would say, skepticism at this point in time that the Hawks are going to pick Alex Sarr number 1 overall. Again, that's just out there in the ether. Maybe the Hawks are smoke screening, etc. Fisher did talk on his podcast over at Yahoo alongside Dan Devine this week that basically there is some buzz about Alex Sarr's agency, WME, and his agent, Bill Duffy, not wanting him in Atlanta, whether it's the player side or the agent side or both. Keep in mind, Jake was not forceful or defiant, anything like that about this topic. It was not a huge focus of the discussion. But the rumblings been out there for a little while. Jake also wrote the next day in his Yahoo column that the Wizards are, quote, considered the preferred outcome from Sarr's camp. Of course, Washington picks number 2 overall. We'll come back to that in a second. I have mentioned, though, on this show multiple times in the last few weeks that this sentiment has been kind of out there as far as Sarr maybe not being enthused about being in Atlanta. Keep in mind, no one's reported that they would refuse to show up, anything like that. But it's been kind of in the ether that Sarr does not want to come to Atlanta on some level. Now, this does not mean you can't take him. There are 2 different things here. A lot of the pushback has been when I've said this on the podcast or elsewhere that, just take him anyway. Okay, I'm not saying you can't do that. And if he is the guy that the Hawks viewed as the number 1 player in this class by any kind of clear margin, I think you just take him. Now, that's a big if. I'm not saying that's the Hawks' belief, but if the Hawks just viewed him as the clear best player, you don't pass because the guy does not want to be here necessarily. It would, though, explain the reported difficulty with getting a workout with Alex Sarr. That would explain some of that. Jake's not getting into his reasoning here, so this is not him saying this, to be clear. But I have heard from more than one person that it has to do with the belief from Sarr's side somewhere that he is not a center full-time and does not really want to be a center. And the way he plays, as I've discussed many times on offense in particular right now, is that of a guy who might not want to play center. So there's potential overlap there if a team like the Hawks view Jalen Johnson, like they actually do, as their full-time 4. There's nuance there. I'm not saying that's the right belief. I'm not making that argument myself, but that is kind of out there in the ether that could be part of the reason why he doesn't want to come to Atlanta. There's some history with Bill Duffy as well. He was the lead agent with Luka, for instance. I don't think that's a huge part of this, to be honest with you, but it could be. I'm not ruling that out by any means either. So maybe that is why Clingan and Risacher are viewed as the front runners right now. And I say maybe on purpose. Maybe the Hawks just don't love Alex Sarr. That is very much a possibility. Maybe it's an elaborate smokescreen for whatever reason. The Hawks really do like Alex Sarr, and they're trying to throw people off the scent or whatever. I don't know. All of that is in play, but I'm just passing on what has been reported at this point in time about what is out there, and that is that the Hawks are leaning towards, reportedly, Risacher or Clingan and not Sarr, and that Sarr's camp reportedly wants to be in Washington. All that's out there. Now, I got questions from some listeners as a result of this unsurprisingly, about whether it could be like an indictment of the Hawks, that someone like Sarr, who isn't even a consensus number 1 overall pick, like it's not like it's an absolute lock that he was going to go there regardless. I've been saying since the lottery not to just assume it was Sarr and nobody else. That was never the case. But, is an indictment of the Hawks that he's trying to angle away from Atlanta, knowing that there is a drop in prestige at number 1 overall and also a loss of money to not go number 1 overall. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's a lot of money. So, for one, I haven't heard that's the reason, like anything about the Hawks organization. I think it's basketball related, probably more likely than organization related, especially because the Wizards, who I said before I want to come back to, are picking second. And yes, they're not exactly a juggernaut. In fact, my favorite stat maybe in the whole league is that the Wizards have not won 50 games since a year that began with a 197. Since the 70s, they have not won 50 games in a season. That's not a joke. Even people that I know that follow the Wizards closely or cover the Wizards are kind of taken aback by a top prospect actively seeking out Washington, seemingly. So that's part of this. But look, it gives me no pleasure to say this out loud, but I've said it before, but there is some skepticism around the league, I would say, about the Hawks with their leadership brain trust right now. This is a front office that has not had a long record of activity, like nothing hugely negative with this group, I'm talking about Landry, Kyle, etc. But there has been plenty of reporting the last couple of years about the front office kind of being a bit of a mess, about the DeJounte trade, the way that Travis Schlenk was ousted, the Nick Ressler factor, cooks in the kitchen everywhere, Tony Ressler, all that stuff. Tony's a very active owner. He's not been also willing to spend big. So that combination of like mandating things or maybe come close to that and also not willing to spend. Lots of different stuff going on in the Hawks front office, at least reportedly. I'll stop with that. But if you did a consensus organizational leadership ranking right now, if you included ownership and front office, the Hawks would not be near the top of that list around the league. It doesn't mean they're right, but I wouldn't say the consensus. There is a belief in some circles around the league that the Hawks are kind of a weird situation right now. I'm not saying that's my opinion. I'm not trying to make a hot take or that it has anything to do with Sarr. But because people were asking me why that would be the case, could this be the reason why? There are folks in the league who don't really buy what the Hawks are selling right now. And I'm not sure if that means anything, or I'm sure it does mean something, but when it comes to ownership structure, front office, the trust I've mentioned decision fatigue in the past. The last couple of years, the Hawks have just kind of like not done much of anything, which you could argue in a vacuum is not the worst idea, but there's this weird kind of like holding pattern. And even number 1 overall pick, like I don't personally have a lot of frustration with the Hawks not being settled on number 1 right now, but I know a lot of Hawks fans are like baffled or confused or frustrated by the Hawks being kind of the team that's not sure what they're going to do here. Even people that I know and trust that usually get a lot of intel are kind of like shrugging on the Hawks right now. And by the way, that can be a good thing. Maybe the Hawks are actually not leaking a lot. And that's, for me, if I'm a Hawks fan, I don't want my team to leak. I know it's easier to have like rumor stuff, but it's probably better process-wise to not leak. So I'll stop for now. But the last thing before I get to a break, on the other side of this, if I was Alex Sarr's agent, I would actively want Alex Sarr to go to Atlanta. Now, hear me out. For one, I think Alex Sarr mostly is going to be a 5, or at least partially going to be a 5 in the near term, maybe in the long term. Near term, maybe more of a 4 out of necessity. But I think if I'm Alex Sarr and I'm a limited offensive player, which I believe that he is, I think a guard like Trae Young in particular would be really, really valuable in unlocking what he could possibly be on offense. Also, you have the reality that the number 1 overall pick makes the most money, but Sarr is a highly dependent offensive player, and he has a lot of questions on offense. I have Alex Sarr number 1 on my board. I said that before on my overall board. He's number 1. So I'm not saying he's a bad prospect because he's not. But offensively, there's a lot of question marks there. And no matter what you think about Trae, I know there's a lot of people that don't buy the Trae experience. I'm not even telling you to do that right now. It is undeniable, however, that he has been fantastic for big men when it comes to making their lives easier on offense and helping them get numbers and efficiency. That is undeniable. Dating back to when he first arrived with guys like Alex Len and Dwayne Dedmon, going through John Collins, Capella, Okongwu, the list goes on and on. He has always been good for bigs. And Alex Sarr is a big. Now, whether he's a 4 or 5, whatever, he's still a big. And I think that for me, unlocking Alex Sarr would be helpful to have Trae Young next to him if I'm Alex Sarr's agent. But alas, that's just me. Okay, I went long on that, but let's just say it is a big unknown right now. The reporting that's been out there from Jake, I don't think I mentioned Mark Stein, but he's reported similarly. The thought around the league right now, as of Sunday morning, is that it's Reese Shea versus Klingon, at number 1 overall. They could be smoke screening, but that is the reporting out there, and that Sarr wants to go to Washington, and we'll update that as we get more information.
Stay up to date on all things Hawks by subscribing to Locked On Hawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Up next, be it by way of injury or suspension, this weekend brought bad news to all New York baseball fans in one way or another. We'll learn about the lineup hits coming for the Mets and Yankees in just a moment on the Big 6 in 60. Game Time makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app, and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms applied. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed. This is the Big 6 in 60, a closer look at the 6 biggest stories in sports. I'm Peter Bukowski. Mets closer Edwin Diaz was ejected Sunday night as he entered the game to try and finish New York's win over the Cubs. Umpires threw Diaz out after finding an illegal substance on his hand before the bottom of the 9th, and he now faces an automatic 10-game suspension. Diaz claims he only used rosin, sweat, and dirt on his hand, but has not said if he plans to appeal the ruling. Locked On Mets host Ryan Finkelstein looks at how New York keeps its hot streak going without its closer.
Right now, we should be talking about the fact that the New York Mets have won 4 straight series by taking their game against the Cubs on Sunday Night Baseball. We should be talking about the fact that since Jorge Lopez threw his glove into the stands on May 29th, the New York Mets are 15-6 over the last 21 games. They have the best record in Major League Baseball. That they're 1 game back of a playoff spot. The Luis Severino threw an absolute gem on Sunday night. Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, and Mark Vientos all homered. We should be going through all of that to open up what is a very exciting show. Instead, we're talking about sticky stuff because Edwin Diaz comes on for the save, and he is not allowed to throw a pitch. They look at his hands and say, that's way too sticky. He's out. Now, there was a zoomed-in angle of the broadcast that showed Edwin Diaz's hands, and there was absolutely stuff there. But differentiating whether that stuff was some type of foreign substance or just sweat and rosin and dirt, which is what Edwin Diaz said it was after the game, there's really no way of telling because you can look at that image and you could see what would look like rosin with dirt on top of it. And Edwin Diaz, when he explained himself after the game, he said it's the exact same routine I do every time. You grab sweat, you grab rosin, you grab dirt. And we've heard this same thing over and over again with the other Mets pitchers who have been suspended, Max Scherzer, Drew Smith. Drew Smith, ironically enough, comes on, and he is the one that relieves Edwin Diaz in that spot. After the game, Drew Smith was asked about the whole situation. He said last year there was never any clarification given to him about why or how he violated the rules. And he says he's been doing the exact same thing that he did that game ever since for the past year without getting in trouble. Here's the problem with the rule, because I know there's some that are just going to look at that image. They're going to be frustrated that the Mets have lost Edwin Diaz. They will point the finger at him, and they're going to say Edwin Diaz is a cheater or the Mets are cheating because they've had 3 guys of the 7 that have ever been suspended for this. 3 of them are Mets: Scherzer, Smith, and now Edwin Diaz. And of course, all of this comes after the New York Mets accused Joe Musgrove of sticky stuff in a playoff game in 2022. Since then, 3 suspensions. And honestly, I'd have to look at what the breakdown is. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 3 of the past 5 guys that have done it, because I know Ronel Blanco did it this year or got suspended for it, but I couldn't tell you any other names. And I only know that because he was the most recent one when I was trying to figure out how many guys have been suspended. If there's somebody else since Blanco before Diaz, then maybe it's 8. Regardless, a majority of the guys are Mets. Is that just a coincidence? Is it bad luck? Who knows? But what's frustrating about this situation is there is not a set plan in place for Major League Baseball on how the umpires should enforce this rule. Because there's been other pitchers in the past who show up with sticky stuff on their hands without anything on their belt and glove, which there was nothing on Edwin Diaz's glove because they gave it back to him. Where in the past, if a guy gets ejected and there's stuff on the glove, they'll confiscate the glove. They didn't do that. So there was nothing on his belt, nothing on his glove. He said he allowed them to smell his hand. They didn't smell any foreign substance, but they said it was too much rosin, sweat, dirt, and so they kick him out. He didn't get a chance to go into the dugout like other guys have in the past to wash his hands. So the whole situation is messed up because that one umpiring crew made the decision, and now the New York Mets feel the consequences for the next week and a half. Now, if you tuned into my show on Sunday, and I encourage you to go back and listen to it because a lot of that is still very relevant. We'll talk about some of it more in the final segment today, but I was breaking down Tyler McGill's bad start on Saturday and why the New York Mets should option him to AAA. And part of my reasoning was you have an opportunity here with 2 off days this week with the Subway Series being played on Tuesday and Wednesday. The Mets are off on Monday and Thursday, where they do not need a 5th starter until July 2nd. So my argument on Sunday was make that move, put a 9th arm in your bullpen. Why not? And then when you eventually need a starter, you can go to Christian Scott or Jose Budo, who I believe right now are better pitchers than Tyler or McGill. Now that decision seems to be even more obvious because you're going to be down a man for the next 10 games. And this isn't a 10-day suspension. It is 10 games. And you're not just without Edwin Diaz, you are without that spot on your roster. So the Mets have to get by here. How are they going to do it? That is one way around it for now. You option Tyler McGill on Tuesday, you call up a pitcher, and that pitcher can be with your team for the first 6 games of Edwin Diaz's 10-game suspension. So there's only 4 games where you would have to go a man short in the pen. Here's how it all breaks down. You got David Peterson and Sean Manaea pitching against the Yankees. Then it would be Jose Quintana's turn against the Astros. I actually think that Severino might pitch that game on Friday because it would be regular rest, and you could break up the 3 lefties, although on the back end of it, if you're going with the 4-man rotation with 3 lefties, they're going to be stacked either way. Regardless, let's just say it's Severino, then it's Quintana, then it's Peterson. Then it'd be Manaea to open up the DC series, and then you can insert a 5th starter, right? And so that could either be Scott or Budo, and then you would go back to Severino and Quintana to wrap up the DC series, Peterson, and then you could insert a 6th starter into the mix. And that would be the same day on July 6th that you would get Edwin Diaz back. And so you'd basically remove 2 guys from the pen at that point, go to a 7-man bullpen, 6-man rotation that could carry you throughout the rest of that stretch where you're going to play 17 games in 17 days with, I guess, the first 8 of them without your closer. If I'm doing the math on that correctly, because you're playing 2 against the Yankees, then that stretch starts. So yeah, the first 8 games of that stretch down Diaz. That's how I think the Mets should manage it, where they can get by without being short in the pen for too long. But then there's questions of who would eventually get that start. Would it be Scott? Would it be Budo? We'll talk about all that stuff as the story unfolds. And of course, if they in fact option McGill. But I think that is the easiest path the Mets have to try to get by right now, because this is going to be very tough. The bottom line is, down an arm or not, whatever it is, you are down your closer. That's the bigger thing. It's back to closer by committee, and this team looks so much better having Edwin Diaz look like himself in that closer role with everybody else knocked down a peg. Now someone else has to step up. In the closer role, I imagine it's back to Jake Diekman and maybe Daniel Nunez. Now, Nunez gave us some runs today. We'll talk about that in the next segment. That doesn't faze me, and I'll explain why. But I believe when it comes to the high leverage guys, you have Garrett, you have Nunez, you have Danny Young, who just came back and I think is going to play a big role, and you have Jake Diekman. And then to a lesser extent, you have Drew Smith, who got thrown into the fire today, and Adam Ottavino, who have been pitching mop-up duty lately. Now they're back to leverage. And then you're going to have Adrian Hauser as your long man, and I would imagine Cole Sulser comes up as the 8th arm to give you more middle relief if the Mets choose to option McGill, which, again, I really think they will based on this set of circumstances. The loss of Sean Reed-Foley is felt even more now because he would have been a closing option as well as a guy that can pitch as a setup man. So now you're down Foley and Diaz in a couple of days. And if Drew Smith ends up hurt after this, well, you never know. You could be down another arm on top of it. Just to real quick run through the options the Mets have in AAA. on the 40-man roster. I mentioned Cole Sulser. He's the most likely guy. He has been up and down a lot this year. The Mets clearly like him. Since he's been back in AAA, 7 games, he's allowed 4 hits, 1 run that was unearned, 6 walks, 8 strikeouts. So a 0 ERA over the last 30 days in Syracuse. I imagine he gets the call. If it's not him, you could look at Josh Walker, who we've seen this year. Hasn't had a ton of success at the big league level, but since going back down in this most recent stint, 13 strikeouts in his last 6 1/3 innings pitched, 1 hit, 4 walks, 0 runs. Beyond that, Ty Adcock was added at some point in the past month here. He was picked up off waivers. He's been with the Mets. 3.12 ERA, 9 strikeouts, and 8 2/3 innings pitched. But batters hitting 306 against him, and his whip is 1.85. Whip is walk and hits over innings pitched. So if you're nearly giving up 2 base runners and inning, not very good. I don't imagine we see Adcock. Beyond that, the Mets could still slide Brooks Raley to the 60-day IL to free up a 40-man roster spot. They also have a outfielder that they just picked up in Duke Ellis that they could easily DFA. So they have options if they wanted to add a non-roster guy into their bullpen. And the guys that I would look at, it's Max Kranick. He was a starting pitcher. He's now been converted into a relief role. He has, in his last 13 1/3 innings pitched, given up 4 runs. That's a 2.70 ERA. But batters are only hitting 167 against him, and his whip is 0.83. If you want another guy that can give you length, maybe it's Kranick. The last one I'd mention is Eric Orrs, who has yet to make his MLB debut. He has a 3.48 ERA in his last 30 days, 1.65 whip, 16 strikeouts, and 10 1/3. And the reason why I sorted these by the last 30 days is with relievers, you really kind of want to ride whatever the hot hand is, whoever's throwing the ball the best. And I believe that's probably going to be Sulser or Walker, assuming the Mets take me up on my little strategy advice here. Option Tyler McGill, eventually get to a rotation with a better pitcher in Budo or Scott. And in the meantime, give yourself another arm to deal with this loss of Diaz. But it's a tough stretch regardless.
Stay up to date on all things Mets by subscribing to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Up next, the Yankees lost another big name to the injury bug, but hopefully not for too long. We'll fill you in on the status of Giancarlo Stanton on the Big 6 in 60. I love sports. I think, that's obvious, right? I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports just aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And believe me, I'm usually in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. There is no bigger home underdog on the diamond tonight than the Detroit Tigers. They have to face Aaron Nola and the Philadelphia Phillies. Pretty tall order. FanDuel has the Tigers money line plus 140. Detroit isn't much good at home. So I don't know. It's the Phillies. Take the Phillies. Something to pay attention to. Total runs. FanDuel has the over-under at 8. The Tigers have sneaky good pitching, so this could be a very low-scoring game. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Big 6 in 60. I'm Peter Bukowski. The Yankees lost a powerful piece of their lineup Saturday night. Giancarlo Stanton left New York's game against the Braves with a strained hamstring, and the Yankees have since said they expect Stanton to miss about 4 weeks. This is Stanton's 8th time on the injured list in the last 6 seasons, and Locked On Yankees host Stacey Gotsulias and Brian McKean fill us in on what more time out for Stanton will mean for New York.
Giancarlo Stanton. His legs. He's so built in his upper body, and then you look at his thighs are big, but his calves. I have bigger calves than him.
Yeah, I got to mention too, this Dominguez injury is bigger now too, because there might not be a spot for him. It did work itself out, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's not mention the fact that I was like, oh, this is actually okay that Dominguez is hurt because no one on the big level's hurt yet. That's my fault. My bad. Sorry, Giancarlo Stanton. It's totally me. I jinxed you. They're racing outside my house. With
how well Stanton was playing, right? I mean, he was playing some of the best baseball he's played over the last couple of years of the Yankees, especially in the month of June. His power numbers were all there. He was killing the ball. And it does feel like this happens the last couple of years, right? Where Stanton gets on a roll, and when he gets hot, he gets sizzling hot. But it feels like the last couple of years he'd get on a roll, and then all of a sudden just dip off because he gets hurt. It really hurts right now. In the middle of that lineup, you kind of need him. He's had a great year, and you really just hoped he wasn't going to get hurt. It's just these injuries frustrate me, Stacey, because he wasn't exerting that much energy for a pro athlete. He really wasn't doing that much. Like, I'm not sitting here being Mr. Baseball podcaster who knows what it's like to be a professional athlete. I'm not saying that. Just because I played in high school doesn't mean I know what it's like to be a pro athlete. I'm not being that guy. But Stacey, you watch that highlight, he really wasn't doing much athletically.
No, but like I said, I really think he did it when he had to step back to second base. He tweaked something, and then he tried running on it. And as he was running,
but why is that causing
third,
an injury like that?
Because fluky things like, why do guys sometimes hurt themselves when they are running down the baseline trying to get to first, and will hurt a hamstring or a quad or something? It's just
because you're running full speed.
No, but like I said, he tried to get back. It was when he tried. I'm telling you, I think that's when it happened. We tried to get back to second because he nearly got thrown out at second, trying to get back to second. Because I kind of saw that, and I was like, "Oh, you got to be careful with that." And then when I noticed the grimace right away, and I said something on Twitter. And
I noticed the grimace.
Yeah, I noticed the grimace too. And some of the beat writers didn't notice it right away, and then they started mentioning, "Oh yeah, okay, we saw the replay." Yeah. I mean, I saw it right away. I was like, "Oh no!"
And then it was very obvious. It was very obvious rounding third that, I know he's going to be out for a while. It was just one of those things, and it's unfortunate. And these kind of things, if he kept this going together for the entire span of the postseason, he kept this whole thing going, he would have finished the year with 40 homers, 90 RBIs. Hitting 260, 270, and then you could shut up all the Yankee fans who don't like him and want him out off the team and want him this and that. You could shut them up. But now you get hurt again, and you don't give him that out. Now you give every Yankee fan that doesn't like you a reason to not like you, and you give them validity. You do. It's unfortunate. I'm not rooting for it. I think Stanton's an awesome player still, but you give a lot of people who don't like him a lot of validity now when you get hurt. And I'm sorry, people like me and you who like Stanton, we can't sit here and defend him. Because it's every year I can defend you when you get hurt. Fluky injuries happen, and I defend Judge here and there. But when you get hurt every single year, you get hurt every single year, and it's hard to defend you at that point because your best ability is your availability. And if you're not on the field, I can't use you. Like Jacoby Ellsbury, awesome player when they signed him, and he wasn't on the field. He's hurt every year. You can't make excuses, and I'm not comparing Stanton and Ellsbury. I'm comparing the situations that he's just not healthy ever. This is just really unfortunate. They did make some. I didn't feel like big moves. I'll call them cosmetic moves. Over the weekend, first they acquired J.D. Davis, and this guy's got a good future. Cash considerations. You see him; he's moved around the league a bunch, but he's got a good future in the league. J.D. Davis has had a down year for Oakland. He has. But it's an experienced player. He'll give you professional at bats. I don't hate this deal at all.
No, I don't either, because it's a fresh body who could play first and third, which is what they need. Because right now in the outfield, or not even the outfield, as annoying as it is without Stanton in the lineup because of his batting, this opens up the DH spot. So if other people need to rest, they can, and you have able-bodied people to play in the outfield. So that is the only positive of that. Other than that, it's not a positive thing because you want Stanton and his bat in the lineup because, as we mentioned in segment 1, he's one of the only guys hitting at this point because once you get past him in the lineup just craters and falls off a cliff. So, some of these guys really need to step up. But I mean, I like this move. It's not a major move. I find it interesting that Davis in 135 plate appearances has 4 home runs, but only 5 runs batted in.
I mean, the team he's on is awful. Like,
I know, but
terrible.
it's just funny. It's like, like he hasn't even hit a double that's driven people in. Like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
He hasn't had a great year, but he's a veteran. He'll give you professional at bats. I think that's all they were looking for.
Well, Met fans are terrified because, he was with them for 3 years and now he's back with the Yankees just in time for the Subway Series. So they're like, oh, great, here we go. J.D. Davis is probably going to have a big hit against the Yankees.
Well, that's what thinks about Stanton, too. Stanton kills the Mets. And now you lose him for that series, too.
I know. It stinks. The Yankees also got Chasen Shreve back to help the bullpen. He was pitching for the Texas Rangers AAA team, and he had a 1.61 ERA in AAA. He's 33 at this point, so it's kind of funny that he's back. I thought I was seeing things when I saw that. on social media. I was like, is this an old tweet from like 2018, 17? What is this? And then I realized that it was, so that's all they need. They just need someone to do that because they've gotten a few guys in the last few days to kind of help with the bullpen because it's so depleted. They recalled Peraza for Sunday's game. They sent him right back to Scranton immediately afterwards. So
he didn't do enough to get called up anyway. Like it was a move that they had to make because they had the roster spot. He didn't do enough to get called up anyway.
Yeah, so he's back with Scranton, and I think it would be pretty funny though if JT Davis did do something to help the Yankees in the Subway Series. You never know.
This feels like a team right now, the way they're playing, that they're getting a little desperate to get to the All-Star break. They need a little bit of a rest.
Yeah, well, that's not for another few weeks. They need to step it up a little bit because they can't keep falling apart like this. Also, big shout out, Houston Astros. Thank you for sweeping the Orioles this weekend. Big shout out to you guys. Appreciate the help. Locked On Astros, Brett, Eric. Good job. I know they sometimes watch. So.
Fastball. Sorry.
Giving you a shout out for that. No, I'm just kidding. But what does that mean? What does it mean? My God. I mean, the Orioles are like beating up on everyone, and then they go into Houston, they get swept.
I don't know if it's a good thing or not. If Houston's picking things up, it could be scary too.
It's just a really weird season. Like so many teams are having ebbs and flows, and the ebbs seem really long, and the flows like it's just And everyone's hitting and falling at different times. Like teams that were bad in April are good in June. Teams that were good in May are terrible in June. Like the Mets picked it up because Grimace threw out the first pitch. The Red Sox have been picking it up for the last 2 weeks. But it's baseball. So this could all be reversed next month. So some of the teams that are doing really well in June that you're like, oh my God, they might fall off again, and the Yankees might pick things up. So you never know. It's baseball.
It's a sprint. It's not, it's that old expression.
It's a marathon.
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Baseball's a 162 game season. It's not football. You can't get those two sports confused.
Yep.
Stay up to date on all things Yankees by subscribing to Locked On Yankees, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up, it'll be winner take all on the ice and the diamond tonight. Tennessee and Texas will play one game for the College World Series, and we'll preview the matchup next on the Big 6 in 60. Game Time makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app, and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms applied. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to the Big 6 in 60. I'm Peter Bukowski. We wrap things up today in Omaha. Texas A&M took Game 1 of the College World Series final Saturday night, but then Tennessee responded with a win Sunday to bring us to Game 3 for all the marbles. One of these schools will win its first ever NCAA baseball championship tonight, and Locked On Vols host Eric Kane set the scene in Omaha.
This is the second time in program history Tennessee's playing for a national championship. We know this, going back to 1951, where Tennessee came up short against Oklahoma 3-2. The final series marks the third time in 4 years where a pair of SEC teams are going for the gold. The Aggies are going for their first national championship in program history, same as Tennessee, while it would be the 24th team national championship in all sports and the first since 2009 for Tennessee, and that 09 team was the women's indoor track and field team. Also, if Tennessee finishes the job and gets the win tonight and claiming the national championship, that would mean the first SEC team in the history to reach 60 victories in a single season, just the fourth conference team to win the SEC regular season title, the SEC tournament title, and the College World Series title in the same season, joining Vanderbilt, who did it in 2019, and LSU, who did it twice in 2009 and in 1993. And if Tennessee wins this national championship, well, it would snap the curse of the number ones not being able to win since Miami back in 1999. But more than anything, it would give Tony Vitello a national championship. It would give this team that has earned it a national championship. It would give those players that built it, the Luke Lipsiuses, the Max Fergusons, the Zach Daniels, the Andre Lipsiuses, the Jake Ruckers, the Alaric Solares, the Drew Gilberts, the Jordan Becks, the Trey Lipscombs, the Chad Dallases, so on and so forth. It would give all those guys, sure, they didn't win it, but boy, without those guys, these guys aren't here. You know what I'm saying? So, man, I'm amped up and ready to go. I'm ready to see them finish this job. I'm stoked. I'm pumped. And Sunday was a good day. But you're just sitting there, and it's so frustrating because the offense just wasn't doing anything. You were getting the leadoff man on, but Tennessee wasn't able to do anything with it. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm talking to my buddy Noah Taylor sitting to my left. And I'm like, dude, this offense is too good. Eventually, something's going to break through. Something's going to break through. Something's going to break through. And finally it did with the home run ball. Go figure, right? Dylan Dreiling and Cal Stark. But make no mistake about it. Those home runs, noteworthy, deserve all the praise in the world. Tennessee won this game, and the season is still alive for another day because the pitching was fan-freaking-tastic on Sunday. So shout out to Drew Beam, shout out to Aaron Combs, Kirby Cannell, and shout out to Nate Snead for getting it done. Just getting it done. Tennessee plays for a national championship tonight, the final day of the baseball season. We've been going at it since mid-February. It was right after Valentine's Day. I was on a plane to Dallas, to Arlington, okay, to watch Tennessee take part in the Children's Shriners Collegiate Invitational or whatever. We followed this team to Florida Gainesville. We followed this team to the SEC tournament and so many home games at Lindsey Nelson in between. We've gone to Lexington, Kentucky. We've seen them play regionals and super regionals, and now here in Omaha. Last game of the season. It's here. It's tonight. Might as well win it. Might as well win it, all right? Win or lose. Tuesday's coverage will lead off with Tennessee, hopefully, being the national champion, and I'm excited. Pitching-wise, real quick, by the way, Christian Moore told some members of the media after the game he's going to play tomorrow, so you don't have to worry about that. Slid into second base, came up a little bit. It took a little time out, and eventually they put Ariel Antigua in there to play second base in the ninth inning. But they do that with Ariel a lot, whether it be third or short or second, because he's a defensive wizard. But Christian Moore said, hey, I'm going to be in that lineup. And Hunter Inslee came back and played center field, which I thought was really, really good on Sunday. But Tennessee's going to go with Xander Sechrest. And then, season's on the line. Final game of the season. Don't hold anything back, right? Right? Nate Snead. I bet you anybody could come in here and face a batter at least if you needed. But I would imagine the pitching would go Xander, with a Kirby and Nate Snead. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, can Combs, can he give me a half an inning? Can, AJ Causey, can he come in and face this batter? Maybe Marcus Feldman, just trying to piece it together a little bit. And then for, for A&M, they are likely going to go with the guy that's already started 2 games here in Omaha. Forgot his first name, but it's Lemke, essentially is his name. And their closer, who didn't pitch on Sunday, Evan Auschenbach, really good player. Would almost guarantee that he's going to be in that game on Monday as well. Time to get after it. Final game of the season. Don't hold anything back. We'll see if Tennessee can be national champions.
Stay up to date on all things Tennessee by subscribing to Locked On Vols, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks again to all of our hosts for their expert analysis on the biggest stories of the day. Follow your team's favorite podcasts wherever you listen and on YouTube for new episodes every weekday. Tune in again tomorrow for a new hour on the 6 biggest stories in sports. This has been the Big 6 in 60 from the Locked On Podcast Network.